We are in the information age of fantasy football, and it's getting harder and harder to find the edges to give you a massive leg up on your competition. But we think we might have found one with Fantasy Points Data Suite, and we can't wait to explain to you why. What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
I'm joined by Brett Whitefield, the owner of Fantasy Points Data. Brett, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, so short, big picture view of my life. I'm married. I have 4 kids. That's the biggest part of my life, obviously. But I've been working in the football business basically since, 2012. I played at a high level. I coached, but then I got into the analytics space, started my career at PFF at the end of 2012 into 2013. And I've been doing this ever since, man. And I worked at I was a part-time employee there for a year, got a full-time job, worked my way up into the management ranks there at PFF, and then eventually left to start, Fantasy Points Data, which is what this conversation is all about.
So what is Fantasy Points Data, and how did it come to be?
Fantasy Points Data, in my opinion, the best, most robust fantasy football or analytics product, period, out on the market, available to the consumer right now. I think the data suite is, it's setting the bar very high for what the standard should be as far as data when it comes to football and how consumers can get their hands on it. How it came to be is pretty simple. I mentioned my story at PFF. Always been a super highly motivated guy. I have entrepreneurial background. Kind of the whole time I was there, just took notes. What I really noticed is that their data wasn't really well positioned to help the consumer, to help the average football fan or fantasy football player or bettor or high stakes player or prop bettor or whatever, fill in the blank. It just wasn't really designed to help them the best that they could. It was really geared towards B2B. And I just felt like I could do this better. I felt like I could develop a better consumer product that really helped the average fantasy player all the way up to a high stakes bettor. So Scott Barrett and I both shared time at PFF together. Most of our careers there overlapped, and we developed a really good relationship. He had left to start this company called Fantasy Points with John Hansen and Graham Barfield, and Tom Brawley and Joe Dolan. Ended up being a phenomenal content-based business, and the content was exceptional. But they had their eyes on bigger, better things. And John Hansen, the visionary is, that's why he's the OG. He's been doing this a long time, and he's made himself relevant for 30 plus years. And he wanted something bigger than what they were doing. So him and Scott and I, we sat down, had a conversation. I pitched to them my vision for what a consumer-based data product would look like. They were completely, sold out for it. Scott, being the brilliant fantasy guy he is, he's always been a numbers guy, an analytics guy as a fantasy guy. And, we really kind of settled on a really cool opportunity here. And so that's how I ended up partnering with them. And, now I'm part owner of the company. We launched Data Suite a little over 18 months ago.
So I've had an opportunity to use Fantasy Points Data Suite, and it's awesome. The information that it churns out is just fantastic. But I think a lot of people watching this video are going to say, how easy is it to use? Is this something that's going to take up a large portion of my time, having to learn it and having to learn how to just use it on a weekly basis? How user-friendly is the product, Brett?
Very user-friendly. And whether you are a very novice entry-level fantasy player or consumer, or you're simply just a fan of the game, there is data in there that makes sense for everybody. There's tools in there that make sense for everybody. And the way we kind of do it is we simplify every major category, whether it's you're looking at rushing stuff or receiving stuff or defense, passing. We have a variety of tools for each category that make it really simple. It's very easy to read. We have a glossary for any terms you might not be familiar with. And then there's the filtering ability is what really sets it apart, right? You can filter just about anything down from splits, game situation, defense, offense, whatever you think you want to split, you can probably find a filter in there to split that out. And then, we have 27 something tools available to the average subscriber right now, with like 15 in the hopper being currently developed. So we're just continually adding to this, making it bigger and better.
And I can sometimes even get in there when I'm setting a lineup or writing an article or getting ready to do a show, where I can just use it for 2 minutes and get exactly what I need going in. It's fantastic. So, Brett, we know that a lot of fantasy managers now know about things like target share, targets per route run. What are some other really cool metrics that they can learn about that Fantasy Points Data Suite is providing for receivers?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much any metric you could conceptualize in your head will have, but we have all the basics, yards per route run, things of that nature. We have some really, really advanced stuff as well. One of my favorite things about the tool is you can break stuff out that like tendency driven production metrics. So like you can see how a receiver performs against certain types of coverages or from certain types of formations or alignments or route concepts. And you can kind of extrapolate all that data and kind of begin to play the matchup game, right? You've got this receiver going against this defense. You can kind of see and predict how that's going to go just by using the data. We make it easy for you. We have a wide receiver coverage matchup tool that kind of tells you, we give you a matchup score based on, that takes into all those factors into account, how teams respond to certain looks on offense, et cetera.
Does that product also help out DFS managers? I know DFS managers are looking for a weekly edge. Does it help you there as well, Brett?
Absolutely. And I think, prop bettors and DFS players, that's where this matchup really, really thrives. I mean, John Hansen, for example, just went 18-2 in his prop bets this past week just from using our wide receiver coverage matchup tool. We have a quarterback coverage tool. And you're just literally targeting vulnerabilities and defenses, and it's all tendency based. So how a certain defense responds to this type of look a offense gives, and how that offense responds in return, and it's super predictive, very, very predictive.
So you've already talked about sort of the edges that I can find for quarterbacks, the edges that I can find for receivers. You've even talked about the edges that DFS players and gamblers can find. But the one position that is constantly giving fantasy managers headaches in sort of the modern era of running back by committee is the running back position. It's so difficult to find consistent running back scoring for our fantasy lineups. What are some metrics that Fantasy Points data provides specifically to the running back position when it comes to running the football that we can apply towards our process with our fantasy teams?
Yeah, so when I'm evaluating running backs from a data perspective, I'm looking at two big categories. One, what does the running back do to increase his efficiency? So things like forced missed tackles and yards after contact per carry, super valuable metrics to me. But I'm also looking for, how does the offensive line and team situation help him as well? So I think offensive line, defensive line type matchup stuff is so important for predicting running back success that I'm looking at that stuff. I'm looking at yards before contact generated by the offensive line. We have a OLDL report that kind of, we grade each team's matchup and their opportunity to run the football based on, who they're playing. And so I think those metrics are super valuable. And then the last thing is all those same tendency driven production metrics I talk about with receivers. You can do that with running backs with things like box count and personnel groupings and formations and run concepts. That's a big one, right? Some teams, it's not, when you're looking at NFL success and failure, it's not always as simple as, oh, this team struggles to stop the run. No, this team probably is good at defending certain looks, and they're probably bad at defending certain looks. We'll tell you which looks they're bad at defending with the data suite, and you can go find running backs that,
You could see the writing on the wall for Bucky Irving getting an increased opportunity in Tampa Bay with some of the metrics from Fantasy Points data.
Yeah, another big one would be the bell cow report, Theo. You can go into the data suite, check out the bell cow report. It kind of tracks the running back's involvement in the offense, and you can obviously break it out week by week and kind of see how their roles grow or regress. A great one, there's Bucky Irving, right? Like his role has steadily been growing in Tampa. You look at explosive run rate and stuff like that. It's on the up. Yards after contact are all popping for him. Typically, those metrics are predictive of future involvement. So when a player is hyper efficient like Bucky Irving is, the team has no choice but to then say, well, we should probably give you more snaps, more opportunities, and you can track how that role grows in the bell cow report.
No, I love it. The bell cow report is fantastic. Just one of the many tools you get when you subscribe to Fantasy Points Data Suite. But as fantasy managers, we're also trying to identify breakouts, identify the next player that we can be ahead of our league mates on. What are a couple of key metrics available on Fantasy Points Data Suite that sort of stand out to you that we can use as a cheat code? I want to be a week ahead of my league mates on things like the waiver wire, Brett, what are some things that Fantasy Points Data Suite provides that can allow me to identify this sort of a breakout player?
Yeah, let's talk quarterbacks for a second. So with quarterbacks, we have a process just strictly dedicated towards charting quarterback play through the eyes of the quarterback. So we are charting, ball location, accuracy, where in their progression are they throwing the football? Are they, throwing from a first read? Is it a secondary read, scramble, drill, check down, things of that nature? And so as the success of those types of metrics grow, typically the quarterback is a trending upwards player, right? So if you go in the data suite right now, you're going to see all the quarterbacks that are hot right now: Justin Fields, Jaden Daniels, Josh Allen. These guys are all leading most of those metrics in the data suite. Obviously, Josh Allen's a good player, right? But if you could have used it to kind of see the Jaden Daniels and Justin Fields big game coming, because Fields has been slowly rising in the ranks in all of those metrics. Pivot over to running backs. I talked about a little bit about the yards after contact and explosive run rate. When you are trying to get an edge, sometimes it is as simple as trying to find the best matchup, like a running back that lives in pretty much like a duo concept or a duo rush concept world, then going against a team that can't stop duo runs. Like sometimes that is the edge. That's predicting future success. And with running backs, typically when they have that first big game, coaches really start to lean into them a little bit more. I think Kyron Williams is a great example from a couple of years ago. It's like if you were tracking his involvement in that offense and how he kind of just got more and more efficient, the writing was on the wall that eventually he would be a bell cow. You could have used the data suite to predict that pretty comfortably, right? That type of stuff happens all the time. Rashad White's a great example too with the pass game stuff. He's been so good as a pass catcher. We track all of that data, all of those yards per route run metrics. He's been at the top of the running back charts long before he became who he is now.
So Brett, one question I have is I can find things like snaps played pretty much right after Sunday's games. But your snap report, how does that differentiate from sort of the guy providing it on X or some guy giving it to me for free? What does the snaps report do that really breaks it down?
Yeah, so we chart everything multi-layered, and I would say at a higher level than any of our competitors. The thing that really stands out to me about how we chart snaps is it's not just as simple as, oh, this guy was active on a pass play. For a fantasy player, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. If you have a tight end who pass blocks 30% of pass snaps, well, that's less valuable than a tight end who's probably running routes on every pass snap, right? So we delineate all of that, and so that charting process takes a long time. But we might not be right after the game on Sunday, but we are like 10 a.m. to noon on Monday morning. All that stuff is pretty readily available, and for the fantasy player, that stuff is way more valuable. Knowing the route share that a player has, and we're actually charting the routes run. It's not just simply existing on a pass play. We're not. If he's screen blocking for a player running a screen, we're not charting that as a route run, where our competitors do, unfortunately. And this, again, just going back to the beginning of the conversation, I wanted to create a product that was more consumer friendly for the fantasy players, the bettors, yada, yada.
Yeah, the snaps report is tremendous. And I'm also getting that information very quickly, which is super helpful when I'm doing things like getting ready for the waiver wire. That's a super cool product. But one thing that I think is great is the key innovations that you're offering with Fantasy Points Data Suite. What is average separation score? This is sort of a brand new statistic that has made its way over here to Fantasy Points, and it's tremendous.
Yeah, average separation score, otherwise known as ASS, is I think the preeminent wide receiver metric on the market right now. There is no consumer stat that is better for predicting future success than ASS. And let me tell you what I mean by that. So we know that yards per route run and targets per route run or first downs per route run, these are all great metrics that are predictive, but they're all production based. So to be able to predict future success, you need the player to have some type of opportunity in the first place, right? What ASS is we are charting separation on every single route run, and what I like to call earned separation. So, for example, if a player sets down in a really soft zone and is open, makes himself available to the quarterback, we're not necessarily rewarding him for that because it's not earned separation. We're strictly going out there grading every single route run based on the amount of separation that they earned themselves. And so we're taking into account things like, ball location doesn't affect separation for us. That's, that would be a quarterback stat. We're really just trying to focus on the wide receiver separation aspect of it. The coverage type, like if you got a cornerback playing a 10-yard cushion and a wide receiver runs a 5-yard hitch, it's probably not earning separation on that play, right? So we are charting that. And what our data scientists at Fantasy Points have figured out is that this is the most predictive non-production stat. And so if you want to see a player that's about to break out that hasn't really got that opportunity yet, you can go look at his ass, and there's a good chance there's a big breakout coming.
Yeah, we're definitely going to be looking at a lot of players' asses for sure this season, looking for that next big breakout. And I will say that the average separation score already worked. Ladd McConkey heading into week 4 was a player that was circled by many people at Fantasy Points. He ends up catching a touchdown, giving you a really, really solid line. Curious to see sort of who that next average separation score breakout player will be, and we'll find that out using Fantasy Points data. It's not available anywhere else. Let's talk about it though. We've talked about how Fantasy Points data can help you as a fantasy manager. We talked about how it's easy to use, but Brett, people want to know how accurate this is. How is your Fantasy Points data suite more accurate than maybe other sites offering a similar product?
Yeah, so there's a couple reasons why I would say we're more accurate. One, we have some of the best, smartest minds in the football business tracking this stuff. Myself, I've been in the business for 12 years. My right-hand man, Stephen O'Rourke and Chris Weck, these guys have been in the business for a long time now. We brought over Scott DiBenedetto from the Cleveland Browns, who, he was in their front office for 10 years. And, he's in a quality control role for us where we scrutinize every single play that's charted to the nth degree. I mean, it's ridiculous. The charting processes are pretty intuitive as well. So they basically check on each other, right? If there's discrepancies like, hey, we have an RPO charted for this play, but we don't have any run block roll types with wide receivers, that gets flagged in the system. And so we automatically know, hey, there's a discrepancy here. Let's fix it. So just the process itself is robust, and it goes through a ridiculous review process. Secondly, like, we've designed these processes, and again, I'm going to beat a dead horse here. It's designed to present better to the consumer. This isn't necessarily a B2B product. This isn't for NFL teams. This isn't for, we will have a B2B product that's different, but this current iteration is for the consumer. And so I already mentioned the wide receiver snap stuff and how you can trust that over a company like PFF or SIS even. I also will mention things like running back missed tackles. We are way different. Our methodology is way different than those companies. And one of the things that we do that's different is we're a little more strict in some ways and we're a little more lenient in others. One thing we do that's completely different though, think about a player like Jahmyr Gibbs, who, is super ridiculously fast, has blinding speed, but he's also got a really good juke move. If he jukes a player out in the open field and that player doesn't get a hand on him, other companies don't chart that as a forced missed tackle. We do. It's clearly a forced missed tackle. There's no doubt about that. He forced that miss. Same with a guy like Tyreek Hill, who is so ridiculously fast. He has angle eroding speed that just breaks pursuit angles. There's instances where we chart that as a forced missed tackle just from that burst and that acceleration. Other companies don't do that. Furthermore, think about like the line of scrimmage and how often a running back's going through the hole and he's getting a guy grabbing on his shoulder pad or trying to pull him from behind. If the contact isn't what we deem forcible contact, we're also not charting that as a forced missed tackle. Now, he'll get credit for yards after contact for sure, but we're not, every time a player gets hit at the line of scrimmage or barely touched or there's a non-forcible contact made, we're not charting those as forced missed tackles. So our forced missed tackle data is really precise. It's really accurate. And we know that data predicts future success, and our data predicts it a little bit better than the other companies.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Fantasy Points Data Suite really is providing that edge. It's the accuracy, it's the user-friendly environment, and it's the metrics that are not even being offered anywhere else in fantasy football, and the great people behind it. You've got some really, really sharp minds working with you, Brett. But there's also going to be fantasy managers out there who have heard of PFF. And I think you have the unique perspective of having worked at both places and being intimately involved in the processes of both places. Why is Fantasy Points data suite different and also better than PFF?
Yeah, so on top of everything I just mentioned with the accuracy and the intelligibility of the data for what we're trying to do, we have a way bigger connection to the fantasy community, the betting community. You talk about John Hansen, he's been in the business for 30 years. Scott Barrett has been one of the best fantasy writers, if not the best fantasy writer for the last decade. Graham Barfield, also an absolute stud. These guys are rooted in the fantasy community. They're connected. They know what the fantasy players want, what they need. And that's why I chose to partner with them over anybody else. It was like that meshing of vision with where they wanted to go, where they wanted to see the data go versus my expertise with the data. It just was a perfect marriage. And I couldn't be happier with the result.
So, Brett, if I want to try out Fantasy Points data suite, is there anything offered that I can go out and try right now for free?
Absolutely. If you go to data.fantasypoints.com right now without a subscription, you can get in. You can play with our basic passing tool, our basic rushing tool, our basic receiving tool. These are, your general statistics that are just super accurate. And this stuff is available right as games end. So if you just watch the 1 p.m. slate and you're like, man, I kind of want to see how my team stacked up a little bit, 4:30 at the latest, the stuff will be on the website. It has a few advanced fields, like for quarterbacks, you could see scrambles and, fantasy points per dropback and things of that nature. So it is pretty fantasy driven. And then my favorite part about this is it gets you comfortable with the Fantasy Points data suite. You can see how the user interface works. You can see some of the filtering options in there. And by the way, those tools do have some filtering options, even though they're free and available to everybody.
So let's say somebody has listened to you. They want to go and get this product. They want to go and give themselves the edge to win their fantasy league this season with Fantasy Points Data Suite. How can they go and purchase that today? And is there anything special that you can offer them in terms of some money off, Brett, to get them in the door here and using Fantasy Points Data Suite right now?
So if you want to sign up for a subscription today, I can give you 25% off. If you're watching this video on YouTube, enter promo code YouTube25 at the subscription menu and you will get 25% off. That is YouTube25.
Love it. Absolutely worth the price. It's definitely going to help you with your fantasy teams. We covered an absolute ton today about Fantasy Points Data Suite, Brett. Is there anything else you want to let everybody know?
Yeah, I didn't set out to do this to be a competitor. I set out to be the best. And with the product we've developed here and keep developing and keep adding to, we are the best. It is the best offering in the fantasy football space. It's the best offering in the data space. There's nothing else that competes with it.
Absolutely. Subscribe for Fantasy Points Data and get that edge you need to win your fantasy league this season.